episode 248 BlockTalks. We speak with Matt Green, non-executive director and head of disputes and strategy at M2 Recovery, to learn how crypto litigation works. I'm your host, Mauricio Magaldi, and this is Block Drops, your weekly digest on blockchain for business. These news are not a form of endorsement, sponsorship, or encouragement for consumption, and are meant for educational purposes only. All right, everybody. I'm here with Matt Green, who's going to tell us who he is and what he does with blockchain. Matt, welcome to BlockTalks.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me. What do I do in blockchain? Great question. So I wear two hats for this podcast, right? I'm a litigator, which means I go around and help people sue or help people who are being sued. That's with my law firm. I'm a partner at a law firm called Lawrence Stevens in London. And the second hat is I'm a director at a company called M2 that funds that kind of litigation. So it funds litigation involving crypto assets, digital assets, whatever word we want to use for today's session. So that's in a nutshell what I did.
I love that you went on whatever we're using this week for crypto digital assets, because one of the things that occurred to me in the last month and a half, I went to Paris twice for Paris Blockchain Week, and then recently for Proof of Talk. And the first thing that I realized is that the hoodies to suits ratio was changing. Paris Blockchain Week was very obvious, but at Proof of Talk, I think I saw maybe 4 people in hoodies. So yes, it's no longer a crypto conference. It is a digital asset conference. And I think that's what we're going to call the industry from now on. But that aside, how did you land in crypto? Because when you landed in crypto, that was still crypto.
It's a great question. So I used to predominantly do intellectual property law, so copyright, trademarks, and I did a lot of tech disputes. And I ended up semi-accidentally doing quite a seminal case, if I say so myself, in England, which had a wide effect around the world on how crypto assets were treated. So to give you a little bit of a background, a hospital in Canada fell victim to a phishing attack. So someone clicked on a dodgy link and all the screens went scary blue in the hospital. And the message appeared, and I'm not going to read it verbatim because I don't remember it verbatim, but it essentially said, all your systems are encrypted. And if you would like to uncrypt all your services, all your information, we can provide a decryption tool, which was very nice of them, of course. And we will provide that if you send us, I think it was 95 Bitcoins at the time. So in today's money, a lot more than it was back then. And an insurer in London was required to pay that ransom. Even though I'm not allowed to tell you ever who that insurer was because they don't want to be seen as paying ransoms, but they were our client. I remember my boss at the time said, does anybody know anything about blockchain at all? What's this all about? And I had some sensible ideas about what I thought it meant. And we were able to work on a case where, and it was with Chainalysis, back in the days when Chainalysis were doing reports themselves for the private industry. They traced the funds to Bitfinex in the BVI, and we asked for a proprietary injunction over those funds that had ended up in Bitfinex. So a proprietary injunction is to take each of those words. Proprietary means over property, so something to do with property. And an injunction is an order to do or not do something. So we had to ask the judge for a proprietary injunction to stop the movement of those funds that had ended up in Bitfinex. And interestingly, academically, for people who care about this sort of thing, property, to get a proprietary injunction, something needs to be property. And property was only limited to, in common law, certainly in England, things that are tangible, like your phone, your microphone that you've got there, or legal rights to things like a debt. And Bitcoin, which was the subject of the ransom and the subject of our injunction, didn't neatly fall into either of those two definitions. And we went through all the case law. And luckily, there was a paper published by the UK Jurisdictional Task Force, a very fancy name for essentially a paper written by some people in industry, to say that Bitcoin could be property. It was very nice of them. It was aptly timed. And we relied on that and our own evidence to get a proprietary injunction over the Bitcoin. And at that moment, I remember it back in 2019 in December, crypto assets became property. No one seemed to care apart from barristers and academics and me, which was very exciting. But it led to where we are today, or is the starting point of where we are today, where people can claim personal rights over crypto assets, digital assets, whatever you want to call them. Certainly in this jurisdiction, it's led to a piece of legislation called the Property Digital Assets Etc. of 2025, so last year. I'm not going to go through the act. I'll let your listeners go through it themselves. But it's sort of that's where we are with the definition of property now. And it all started back in that case. And that's how I got into all of this. And it was all very cool, semi-accidental, very opportunistic, but overall has led to me doing litigation involving digital assets every day. I don't do anything else.
Well, that has both a good side and a bad side. I mean, that means there's a lot of litigation to go around in crypto. But there's also something interesting that you kind of entered crypto through the front door. I mean, it was your realm of expertise. Something needed to, emerge for the litigation to take place, and you ended up in the rabbit hole. Now, some people will go through life seeing some of these things, living through them, and then that's just a one-off and they move on and they go back to whatever they did before. You didn't. So how did that come about? What keeps you here? Is this just because of your expertise? But it doesn't go too far if it's just a job. And it's hard enough to kind of, demotivate anyone in a rainy day. So what kept you around once that was done? Was this the opportunity, the challenge itself? What are the motivators in keeping you around?
So I remember at the time speaking to my dad about this, because he said, well, do you want to pivot to this industry? This is all a bit spurious, isn't it? You're an intellectual property lawyer. What are you doing? And I remember telling him that this was an opportunity because this tech, as far as I was concerned, wasn't going anywhere. The industry, although in its infancy to some extent still is, depending on your perspective, the industry is going to impact lots of things. It would probably like saying that you were an internet lawyer back in the 90s. It's just a piece of tech that you need to understand well. And lawyers who understand that well are going to go far, I think. So for me, it was opportunistic. I remember at the start of 2020, I was banging on the doors of insurers saying, we've just done something good for an insurance company that's paid a ransom. What about you? Do you want to be able to recover your ransoms paid? And if you remember rightly, at the start of 2020, something called COVID happened. And although the insurance companies were interested in what I had to say, I fell very far down the pecking order of importance once COVID hit. So I started turning my mind to seeking out individuals who had lost assets. Now, when I say I'm a litigator, I deal with all kinds of disputes. But at the start of all of this type of work, it was a lot of individuals who had somehow acquired crypto assets, whether they were bought, swapped, whatever it may be, and then they were lost. And it was our job to try and use tracing reports to injunct whoever obtained those assets and try and get them back. And there's a load of case law that started in England, 4 or 5 pieces of law, which described how you understand the location of assets, how they can be held on trust, all sorts of weird and wonderful things that actually a lot of other jurisdictions were looking at. What it led to over the next 2 years from there was me representing some really interesting individuals. And I'll tell you a little story, if I may, about some of the crazy things that had happened. So there was this one lady, her husband died of a heart attack, and she got his life insurance. She was a really sweet lady, and she went on Facebook, and she went on a group called I Miss My Husband to try and reconcile her feelings with others who had suffered similarly. And she ended up meeting someone on there during COVID. They shared the same sort of religious belief, got to know each other. And long story short, once money came in and he doubled it and doubled it again, she'd lost just over $1 million worth of tether. A lot of it was the life insurance policy. We traced that money and saw that a lot of it ended up, to cut a long story short, in a human organ harvesting facility in Myanmar. So what had happened was a lot of the money was traced to one of the major crypto exchanges. I won't go into which one for the moment. They hadn't done their KYC. We got disclosure from that crypto exchange to find out who their customer was. And it was an organ harvesting facility in Myanmar. The reason we know that is because the IP addresses that were included in the disclosure, you could actually pinpoint where it was on Google Maps. And I remember the investigators showing me people leaving reviews of this place saying that they'd lost a kidney, etc., which was utterly bizarre. Now, strangely and importantly, even though assets were found to be with someone or an enterprise in such a bleak, far away entity, a company far in a country far away, we were still able to recover those assets because we were able to freeze the funds that was at this major crypto exchange. And even though their customer was so far away, because we were able to negotiate with that exchange and get the correct orders, it didn't really matter where the customer was. It was the fact that that exchange helped, they complied with court orders and helped us. So one of the messages really is, and the reason why I've stuck at it is, if you know what you're doing, you can make actual recoveries of assets. One of the things that people think about is that if you've had money taken from you on chain, it is gone forever, and that's absolutely not true. So that was one of many stories that I can talk about in some of the work we've done. But it's important to note that you can get assets back.
And it kind of weaves it into an interesting moment. Maybe it's because I had Stephen Sargent on the pod, but my LinkedIn timeline has been flocking with anti-fraud MLROs and oversight and compliance. I think this is the mark of the industry coming of age, where traditional firms are now getting into the asset class as well as the technology, and then bringing people with native knowledge to either launch the products, but also to monitor and oversee the product operations in such a way that is more akin to what they already do for traditional rails and things like that. In terms of the profile of your client base, is that also changing? Are you seeing more traditional firms rather than the crypto adventurer of the past that left an inheritance for the wife in Tether, but the regular day-to-day, is it starting to feel more institutional at this stage?
It's weird because we haven't rehearsed this, but what you're doing is you're neatly leading me down all the different stories that I have in the correct order. So thank you for doing that. Yes, things have become slightly more institutional. So yes, of course, there are individuals who bought a lot of assets relatively speculatively. They still exist and they still get hacked or scammed, whatever it may be. But I'm seeing an uptick in a lot more institutional clients. And what they do is, for example, there was a hedge fund in London who hired a very small team to trade in crypto. And they didn't really know what they were doing, but they thought, well, there's money to be made. So they hired some people and hoped for the best. Now, in an actual case, what had happened was this hedge fund had, out of nowhere, $1.9 million of USDC disappeared from their custody. And they had no idea. I remember one of the American lawyers who referred me the work wrote to Circle. Circle said, nothing to do with us, good luck. And we traced the funds, and they sat for 5 days on a private address. Now, that made us think that this person was not sophisticated, that this was not someone who was laundering money quickly in the way that you might expect through your fixed floats and your change nows and convert it into Monero. So we asked this hedge fund to look internally. Is there anybody that they might suspect who they'd hired recently who might have done this? Now, this company had told me that there was a few people that they were going to look at, but what they had done is they had installed HR monitoring systems on everybody's profiles on their laptops. Took a picture of their screen every few seconds. And upon reviewing it, we noticed that there was one individual who had no permission to go into the trading engines, booted off an engineer, downloaded all the relevant files, debugged it in whatever capacity. And on screen, we could see the private key for their account on, I think it was Polymarket. Now, of course, we didn't see that person take the private key because they probably took a picture on their phone. But the fact that they had it on screen, then they Googled how to set up a MetaMask wallet. And then they Googled how to trade on Polymarket. Was pretty good evidence for us that this was an inside job. Now, to cut a very long story short, or maybe a short story even shorter, we think we knew who it was. We went to court. We got a proprietary injunction, which is now familiar to everybody. We've got a worldwide freezing injunction. So that's an injunction against that individual for all of his assets around the world up to the value of the loss. And we got something that I'd never got before at court, which was what's called an Anton pillar. In human language, that is a search order of his house. So we were able to go to this guy's house. He was a 25-year-old kid, lived with his mum. And we were able to go early morning, knock on his door, and search his house without him knowing. Needless to say, within 9 days, we got 80% of the money back. We think that the extra 20% was the cost, of laundering the money. So once we started this process, we could see the money being laundered properly. We think he said to someone online, I'll take 80% of the value of this if you want to take the rest of it and launder it. So again, another story that hopefully is helpful and exactly, I'm hoping, answers your question. That was to do with an institutional player, someone who is in TradFi, moved in, hoped for the best, and then didn't necessarily land on their feet. So we were very lucky to be able to help them out as well.
I'm used to hearing every year when Chainalysis, TRM Labs, Elliptic, these forensic firms, they issue a year in review on crypto fraud and scams and hacked wallets and whatnot, right? And my TradFi friends will forward me the link and, laugh at my face. See, this is just ripe for scams and fraud and everything. And my usual answer, which they already know, and I think they do that on purpose, is the only reason why you're seeing this is because you can. We don't see this in your bank because you guys hide that shit. Now, on your perspective, as you deal with these things, and what is the comparison between the ability to do the things you just described in an organized, structured manner, of course, with the laws behind it and everything, versus what it would entail to do this on TradFi, and how much easier or how much harder one is compared to the other? And can we attribute this to the technology that's now available? In other words, is my taunt to these friends justified?
Your taunt is absolutely justified. And I like it. And I'm going to steal it next time someone does the same to me. I hope that's okay. The reason we're able to see and have all these statistics is because everything is on chain. So you'll be able to see the movement of these funds. Now, the wrinkles in that are that when it ends up at a big exchange, what they do is they'll put all of the money in it's not a good term, but their omnibus account. They'll put it all together in whatever accounts, and they'll issue their clients an IOU a lot of the time. So their client actually isn't holding, if you're I know they're geo-blocked in England now, but Binance customer, if you deposit one Bitcoin, they'll keep that Bitcoin and they'll put in the ledger internally an IOU. So you won't be able to see what happens to that exact money once it goes into, say, Binance. I'm sure a lot of the big other players behave like that as well. So what you'll do is if there's an investigation, you'll see that the money has gone to, say, Binance, and you don't know what's happened to it. It's gone in. You want to know who their customer is because they're probably laundering the money. And you want to see if it comes out. And Binance, or whoever the exchange may be, are the only ones who are going to be able to tell you that information. Okay? However, to be able to see on chain X number of transactions until it gets to Binance or whoever it may be is extraordinarily helpful. If it were the other way around and money was deposited in a bank account, that one transaction, to move to see what happened to their money on the next transaction, you would have to go to the bank and you would have to get disclosure from them every single transaction. So actually, it's much more transparent on chain. The difficulty is on chain is, although you can see everything until it gets to a private institution, you don't know who it's with. So you'll be able to see it's gone from address A, Z, whatever it may be, to the next person, but you won't know who they are. With a bank, at least, if you do get disclosure from that bank, they should give you all of those details and you're able to point at somebody. But largely, I agree with you, Mauricio, that it's much easier to be able to follow money on chain. So long as, and there was a piece of law recently on this, a case called Deloya, where so long as the investigator is clear in their methodology as to how they're tracing funds, then the court will follow that. So it could be first in, first out. I don't have to deal a lot of the time with all of this as a technicality, so long as they're consistent, we'll follow it. So in that respect, it's a lot easier. Now, a lot of those reports as well talk about different types of criminality. Money going to sanctioned individuals or entities, money going into nefarious countries. And then it begs the question, well, how much cash is going there? And the answer is we're probably not going to know. Now, it was in papers recently that the Iranian regime was taking Bitcoin as payment to go through the Strait of Hormuz. And to what extent does that prove that Bitcoin is nefarious? The answer is not really. because there's lots of other assets that they're probably taking to fund their acts as well. It just so happens that Bitcoin's quite easy. And guess what? We'll be able to follow that Bitcoin going into their regime, going into whatever platform they use. What it does from there on, we don't know. But if we were going to do it with any other assets, we may not even know that it's going to a particular place. So again, you're absolutely right to taunt your friends in that way.
In terms of the technological convergence we're living, there's a lot of AI development that is kind of intertwined with crypto, because it's just easier to use crypto through AI than in an interface. The speed in which these things are happening is really mind-boggling. I mean, I work in tech. I'm a product guy in tech, and I get every morning I wake up and I ask myself, what the hell did Anthropic launch today that is going to turn the work I did the last 2 weeks obsolete? And I'm in tech. You're a tech lawyer. Like, what is that speed doing to your profession, doing to your, and I know I'm kind of skewing a little bit more into AI, but there is a huge interface between AI and blockchain that we've explored on the show multiple times. So as a non-tech professional, what is the convergence of, you're working on crypto as a substrate, but now there's all these tools, like we mentioned a few of the firms that are working on the data analysis. They are also baking in AI quite a lot into the stuff that they do and they offer. What is this doing both on the perpetrator side as well as the victim side? Well, what's this almost like perfect storm for bad actors shaping up like?
There's two things I think it's worth mentioning. Number one is AI is being used to extract money from people. So what I mean by that is you can set up voice recordings, automated telephone calls, automated emails that look like legitimate companies that are tricking people into parting with their money. Voice recognition software that allows people to sound as though they are from friends and family to trick people into departing with their money. So in that respect, it's being used as a force for bad, for evil, unfortunately. And I always stress vigilance. It's strange, but sometimes when people call me and I don't know who they are and they say they're somebody, I put them through security. They ask me for security, and I have to say, well, like, you called me, I don't know who you are. It could be anybody. Secondly, AI allows assets that have been, and we use the word misappropriated to cover all the scenarios. AI is used to make the laundering and dissipation process extraordinarily fast. So if you've lost, I don't know, let's say 10 Bitcoin, and you sent them over because of a direction that you received on the telephone because someone said they were from one of these big crypto exchanges and you're a customer, the likelihood is that money is going to fly off straight away and be laundered in many different ways. There is actually a process called smurfing, which I found out recently. It's when they break the asset down into many different chunks so that it's 0.0 Satoshi's worth of funds, and then they bring it all into one place to try and make it more difficult to follow. Anyway, so the idea is that the actual money, the property, that exact money or its exact traceable proceeds are very difficult to follow in a very obvious way. Timely wise, by the time you get your reports and lawyers have caught up, that exact money is likely to be gone. However, that's not the end of the story. So if we want to follow the money, and AI is being used to help launder it, that's our proprietary injunction. However, if we know or have an inclination as to who the parties are who are laundering the money, we can go after them. It's almost like a debt. If Mauricio, if you took £10 from me and you burnt that £10 note, you still owe me £10. Even if that exact property is gone, you still owe me those £10. So what we do is we try and get a worldwide freezing injunction, say, well, even if you burnt that money, even if you've dissipated that Bitcoin, that £10, any other money that you've got or any other assets are also due to be ring-fenced and should be ours. So we can defeat this speed issue if we know who the individuals are who are, what would we call the defendants, the people who stole. Now, they work in two categories, just for listeners' sake, because it sometimes can be very abstract. Defendant one, D1, as we call them, is the person who stole from you. It could be someone who called you up on the phone. It could be someone who's hacked into your systems. It could be the North Koreans. They are defendant one, the person who caused the loss. Okay. We trace the money along, or trace the funds along whichever blockchain until they reach somewhere that we can identify people, normally in exchange. The customer of the exchange, the end point, is our defendant two, D2. Now, we may not know who D1 and D2 are, But in England, we have something called persons unknown jurisdiction, whereby if you can adequately define those parties, and so long as you can serve them papers, you can go after them, you can sue them. Let me give you an example. D1, persons unknown D1, can be someone online who uses a fake name. And so long as you can serve them by their Facebook account or by text, whatever it may be, you can add them into proceedings. In fact, there was a case I worked on several years ago where, following an attack by the North Koreans on Atomic Wallet, our D1 was Lazarus. And we were able to serve them because if you receive money as Lazarus, you are using a crypto address. And it is now a court-sanctioned methodology to serve legal papers via NFT, which is really cool. So no one can wriggle out of this. It's great. We send an NFT with a legal letter with a URL saying this is your inbox, keep checking it, and the courts love it. You can also do that for D2. So long as those guys have assets that you can recover, even if it's a fake name, you don't know who they are. If D2, say, is a customer of, I don't know, Coinbase, and even though your 10 Bitcoin's gone, they've got 20 million worth of tether, even if they're using a fake name, fake email address, passport ends in all zeros, protonmail.com, so long as there's money there, you can serve all the papers on them via any KYC Coinbase has. If they don't, you can serve it on via NFT. And so long as Coinbase comply with the orders, you can get money back. So even though there's AI, I'm trying to bring it back to AI, even though there's AI that can help launder this money super quick, so long as you know what you're doing and you understand who the theoretical parties are, you can recover money. It's really cool.
It's yet another example of how much AI needs blockchain to a certain degree, right? I mean, you're always reeling it back into the chain. And it's also another testimony of how regulations and law enforcement could benefit from blockchain in general, right? And I know I'm a proponent of on-chain privacy. I built a chain for that, but I understand the importance of selective disclosure, which is what we built for Midnight, for example. And after that, many other chains are coming out with their own flavor of selective disclosure. And I appreciate that this is something that I've been banging on this for so many years about on-chain oversight by regulators, and gradually they're coming in, and now with the laws and regulations actually making it possible to be legal to send an NFT to someone and get that person's subpoena. It's pretty wild. In terms of more personally to you, we know crypto doesn't stop. It's 24/7. Even now, MasterCard added stable coins for 24/7 settlement on their card scheme and all that. How do you keep yourself healthy and hopefully sane working in this industry that does not stop?
I think you have to be realistic and set expectations. Sometimes people have disputes, whether it's they've had their assets misappropriated or not, and they want answers immediate. And we have to remind them that actually, even getting tracing reports by some third party, it still requires, unfortunately, a very short scope document or a legal document or an email to confirm your relationship with these people. So actually, the traditional industries in law and accounting and forensics, they still take time for you to even set up. Okay. I would say that even though it is 24 hours, we still have to play by our regulators' rules. So we can't just rush off and do crazy stuff. We have to make sure that we follow what's called the SRA here, the Solicitors Regulatory Authorization, or Authority, sorry. But it's always been the same, I suppose, with money. To some extent, it's still 24 hours. It might take a little while to deal with remittances. But if the money's gone, the money's gone. It doesn't matter in that respect. It's normally quite high stakes, though. And what I mean by that is because you are able to trace it theoretically for 24 hours a day, there is this expectation and this desire within me and my team, at least, that we want to do. So we do find ourselves working late on the phone to these investigators who, are dedicated like us to try and track things down. It does get quite addictive. It does impact your personal life, but hopefully you're with a partner and family who see how much you care about it. But in that respect, because you can do something, you feel obliged to do it. And we have had results on our end by working quickly. And although it's exhausting and you don't get a lot of time to switch off, it is exhilarating.
There's an upside of that for sure. And industry-wide, and I know, being a lawyer as you are, working in this particular angle in the industry that you do, you probably have a laundry list of things. But what is the one thing as an industry we must fix now to avoid working another 15 years in the industry and realizing that we did not fix that one thing, and now we're back to square one for whatever reason. What would be that one thing in your opinion, and why?
If we think about banking, okay, banks have a duty to customers and to some extent third parties. We've got hundreds of years of banking laws to protect client funds, to protect the public. That does not apply currently to crypto exchanges. They are, to some extent, allowed to get away with things that banks cannot. They're allowed to be registered in faraway jurisdictions and have no presence here. They are, to some extent, allowed to or try and ignore court orders. And there are absolutely no repercussions if they are, I don't know, a company in St. Lucia and they're operating in England. There's nothing. So what I would implement, what I would try and secure, and I'm confident someone will, subject to the right case and facts and appetite for litigation to appear, is for there to be a duty of care, like a bank, so that if you are going to custody, take in assets, that you have a duty to comply with orders, that you will actually proactively do that, that these parties will help victims of fraud in the same way that banks are required to. So that's the one thing that I would change. That's the one thing that we've seen, I think, let the industry down. It's obvious FTX let people down, and you can go all the way back to Mt. Gox, I suppose, if you want. But we're seeing a little more compliance of exchanges trying to do the right thing, but there's nothing really set in stone that is a duty to help people. Now, some of your listeners may say, well, Matt, there's the Financial Service and Markets Act update coming in next year, 2027, which will make the issuing of certain financial products, including crypto assets, falling into the regime. And my answer to that is, whilst that is great on paper, that only applies to companies that are in or looking to operate in England. And what happens if you've been hacked or scammed and the money's been sent to an exchange in Bermuda or wherever it may be, the Seychelles? They can't do anything. That piece of regulation doesn't help whatsoever. So I would like to see some sort of, maybe not global, because, well, I mean, an ideal world, yes, but some sort of recognition of some sort of duty, recognizing that these things are global, international, and that actually we should all be trying to help each other in the same way that you would hope banks should do, really.
Yeah, I had a friend tell me this once, and I will never forget is, if it moves like a bank, if breathes like a bank, and if shakes like a bank, it's probably a bank. So the regulations should apply. But I'm with you. I think there's also some degree of, I wouldn't say self-regulation. I don't like that concept at all, because I think it's just void. But the industry organize itself to hold peers accountable. I think that's a good start, and probably one way to allow some degree of enforcement when the jurisdiction oversight doesn't necessarily apply in that capacity.
I don't know if they do, though. I mean, I would like to be able to see people holding each other to account. I'll give you an example. When Bybit got hacked, they then came out. I mean, they handled it brilliantly, to be fair. They got hacked, and then they started, and you'll have your own opinions, and your listeners will have their own opinions on this. Bybit started to make noise that exchanges should be helping each other, should be helping members of the public and victims of fraud in the same way that they were victims of that attack. Now, I can only speak from my own experience, but historically, when Bybit has been written to and my clients have asked for help, they've ignored it. And they may be getting better, and I hope they are, but it seems as though until these companies go through some sort of difficulty, they will just shut people down. And I think there is something that's changing, hopefully, because I think a lot of these companies want to be banks. That's what's driving them forward, because that's where a lot of the money is. But whilst they are exchanges and they don't have those duties imposed over, they are money-making machines. And if there's anything that's going to stop them making money, then they're not going to do it. So it was very entertaining seeing Bybit being upset that other people wouldn't help them, or would to some extent, when actually, when others need their help, they don't tend to play ball.
Another word to the wise. For the folks who listened to us this far, what would you want them to take away from this little chat we had?
I think it's important for people to know that if assets have been taken, stolen, lost, hacked, whatever it may be, it doesn't just fall into the ether and disappear forever. It actually, you can see where this money is, subject to it going somewhere private like we discussed. So it is the most traceable thing that you could possibly have. The difficulty is knowing who is behind it all. And there are ways to unveil, to pierce that veil. But I just want people to remember that if the money is gone, if the funds have gone in some way, it is the opposite to say that it's disappeared. It's very much traceable, and people shouldn't give up from trying to recover their funds. They should speak to professionals who know what they're doing, who hopefully can give them a sensible opinion as to whether they are realistically recoverable. But it's just absolutely not the end of the line if they do disappear.
Perfect. Matt, this was very entertaining and very educational. The best of both worlds. It was a pleasure having you on the show, and hopefully we'll meet in the city at some point.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Catch us online. We're on Instagram at BlockTalks Podcast, on Twitter at BlockTalksPod or Xerox Mauricio. We're on Lens at blockdrops.lens. We have a newsletter on LinkedIn. Write to us at blockdropspodcast@gmail.com, and you can listen to the BlockDrops podcast at Spotify, iColab, Faberbun Tech, and all of the other major streaming platforms. Yay! Shout out to Matt for such an incredible journey into crypto as a litigation lawyer. Shout out to Shankirna for making this conversation happen. Don't forget to leave the ratings on your favorite player and check out the merch store at blockdropspodcast.xyz. This is all for today. Stay rare, stay weird. LFG.